Yeah, so it's very much a balance, and it has to be a balanced approach. I want to ask someone as little as possible to be able to open a new account or to be able to decision a loan. But oftentimes, having more information makes us more comfortable from a risk perspective making decisions. So we're really doing two things. First, we are doing our best not to ask for information that we already have, right? Or that we could buy somewhere else. So that's a really important thing. So being able to pre-fill things based off of someone's cell phone number, those types of things. But then second, we're really developing a very collaborative culture here where we can have those conversations about what is absolutely necessary. So we're having those conversations as an entire leadership team and then really own our risk profile as an entire organization. I think that's significant in terms of how we're able to make progress as fast as we're able to.
And when we talk about the management of risk and innovation and experience, oftentimes bankers and credit union executives, we get in our own way. And that's where leadership really comes in. Welcome to the FIsionaries podcast, sponsored by Alchemy. I'm your host, Jim Marous. Right now, the greatest threat to banking isn't fintechs or big tech. It's member indifference. If your experience doesn't engage, your members will quietly drift away. Your members don't compare you to the credit union or bank down the street. They compare you to Amazon, Netflix, and Apple. If your experience isn't as seamless and isn't as intuitive, you're already behind. For banks and credit unions, falling short means disengagement, lost loyalty, and missed growth opportunities in a marketplace where switching has never been easier. On this episode of FIsionaries, I'm sitting down with Jared Barr, Chief Experience Officer at Grow Financial Federal Credit Union, to explore how his institution is meeting this challenge head on. Over the past 8 years, Jared has helped Grow transform his approach to marketing, digital, member experiences, and culminating his leadership of the entire customer journey as CXO. This conversation is both a wake-up call and a roadmap. Competing on products and pricing is no longer enough. The real differentiator is experience and engagement. Jared will share practical strategies to break down silos, modernize engagement, and design journeys that don't just meet expectations, but will create loyalty, advocacy, and long-term growth and value. So Jared, in today's market, the difference between growth and decline comes down to one thing: the customer experience, the member experience. And most financial institutions, just in my perspective, just aren't moving fast enough. So you've had multiple leadership roles across Grow, from marketing and digital and card services, and now you're the customer experience officer. How has that broad experience helped to shape your approach to what you're trying to do in the member experience arena?
Yeah, great question. I think all of those experiences really for me have kept me kind of very close to the front lines. And so to the member, but also just to people, consumers in general. And so that also means that I really prefer to approach shaping the experience with this sense of urgency, right? To your point about growth, you're either growing or you're declining. And so I kind of view everything as a bit of an existential threat. But I think definitely that marketing slant of the background has really made sure that I'm very focused on the customer, the member, and those types of things. Is very natural, I think, from a career progression standpoint for me.
So what does experience, in the quote marks, mean at Grow, and how do you ensure that it's embedded across all touch points? You know, you've been in a number of different areas, and you realize that while we may get customer experience good on the call center line, we may miss it at the branch. And while we may get it in the branch, we may miss it on the product side, because it really involves more than just the interactions. it really takes in everything, including the mobile banking experience and the mobile the web experience, things like that. But what does experience really mean, and how do you take it across all the touch points?
So I've been given a dual mandate really by our CEO to leverage risk and technology to improve the member and team member experience. And that means we're really looking pretty much everywhere. So it's not only the member experience, it's also the team member experience. And so in my mind, I have this vision of a thing I've created that I call the friction flywheel, which really consists of defining, finding, and removing friction on a continuous basis. The idea is that the job is never done. And so as an organization, we have to make it very clear to everyone what we view as friction or a poor experience. And then we have to constantly look for and identify those opportunities and then really build the teams, the partnerships who can do the work and really remove and deploy better experiences moving forward.
Well, it's interesting because you talk about friction and you also reference risk. Those sometimes seem to be counterbalancing. That you remove friction, you're increasing risk in certain ways, and then risk is sometimes seen as a barrier to innovation. So they all work together, but not. They almost work against each other. You've spoken about leveraging risk strategically. How does that mindset influence your approach to the overall customer experience and engagement level?
Yeah, so it's very much a balance, and it has to be a balanced approach. I want to ask someone as little as possible to be able to open a new account or to be able to decision a loan. But oftentimes, having more information makes us more comfortable from a risk perspective making decisions. So we're really doing two things. First, we are doing our best not to ask for information that we already have, right? Or that we could buy somewhere else. So that's a really important thing. So being able to pre-fill things based off of someone's cell phone number, those types of things. But then second, we're really developing a very collaborative culture here where we can have those conversations about what is absolutely necessary. In other words, it can't just be my job and my role or against the role of the risk officer or anything like that. So we're having those conversations as an entire leadership team. So our RIMCO, our quarterly RIMCO meetings are valuable because now they've become a forum where we can talk about those things and then really own our risk profile as an entire organization. I think that's significant in terms of how we're able to make progress as fast as we're able to.
Well, it's interesting. You bring it up, and we talk about it often, but not many organizations really do it to bring everybody in the room. Because if everybody has a stake, and if leadership says our goal is, let's say, a 3 or 5 minute new account opening experience, and we don't want to leave people out in the lurch. So you can make it 3 to 5 minutes, but if you leave everybody behind because you say, well, but it's too risky, then you've really beaten yourself up. And when we talk about the management of risk and innovation and experience, oftentimes bankers and credit union executives, we get in our own way. And that's where leadership really comes in. So how do you work through that balance? How do you work with your other leaders in your organization to break through those barriers of what was done in the past and what needs to be done to truly be a digital partner in the financial services industry?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think we have to have a lot of really practical conversations that ultimately come down to, are we comfortable with how we're treating the member or a prospective member, right? Are we treating them like humans, right? Or are we assuming from the get-go that they are committing fraud, right? And so some cases we see in some of our policies and our procedures that the way we inherently treat people when we start asking questions about different things, it's like, what are we really incentivizing our team members to do? Are we really starting with our best foot forward with our customers? So I think it does come back down to, are we just able to have a conversation about how is this going to make people feel? How are the ways we can mitigate any risk it might create by acting in one way or another. And I think we've been pretty successful in being able to do that.
Well, it's interesting because the experience, your member experience, begins before they even walk into a branch or try to open an account digitally. The reality, though, is that, as you said, inherently, we almost put barriers in the way to say, you've got to prove to us that you're worthy to be our member, our customer. And that is just, it sounds silly when we talk about it. But as you said, if you break down the processes, there are so many ways that we do that without even knowing it. What was the biggest challenge in moving from what I'll call the traditional new account opening experience with or without digital engagement and where you are today?
Well, we are still on that journey, and we're in the process of adopting some of the new tools that our digital platform provider, Alchemy, has recently acquired. So we're in the process of doing that. And I hesitate to say this because of how it might sound, especially because we're on the outset of implementing, Mantle's, member onboarding process. But I haven't had a lot of barriers, honestly. I think some of that is because we're already an organization that is having those conversations. And I say that, I mean, we literally just had a conversation with our risk team earlier this week. They've been through all the demos. We've had all the conversations. We've talked about how, implementing a much better member onboarding platform is going to give us the opportunity to kind of rewrite a lot of our processes. And we had kind of a last minute meeting to talk about, hey, we're good, we're doing this, and it's all thumbs up, green lights, all the way around. And that's because, just like I'm not only worried about how something looks or how many fields are in something, I'm worried about, more of the journey. They're worried about that too. So we have the same goal. And so they're not just, yeah, but I've got to mitigate risk. We've got to eliminate risk. They realize that we're in the same boat. We move forward together. And so, you know, that just hasn't been a challenge for us. I mean, we have a really clear, I think, and long runway for a number of reasons, to be able to continue to implement and innovate as an organization. And I'm recognized that I'm in a very fortunate position because of that.
I'm smiling internally because what you're saying is really the barrier we're trying to break through on this podcast and on other things I'm doing. Just saying we've got to get out of our own way. We've got to embrace what's possible, and it gets down to leadership. As you said, you are graced with leadership that opens that door and says, I get it. I know we have to do things differently, and we're going to do everything in our power not to get in the way. I kid about the fact that, be it Mantle or any of the other really good digital account opening platforms, the problem that sometimes happens is we buy that capability, we partner, and then we say, but by the way, we still have to start with a driver's license. And all of a sudden, you don't realize it, but your partner realizes you've just destroyed one of the things we bring to the table to make it so it can happen. And that takes a partnership where both sides really move toward the middle, and you're willing to embrace what is possible without, somebody or some complete organization getting in the way. So, all this requires data, and it's a huge role when you get to personalization, when you get to experience, when you get to decision making. How is Grow harnessing data insights to move from great insight internally to a better deployment that serves members?
Yeah, so I think that's happening. That's happening on a few fronts. First, we recognize that we have to get our own house in order in terms of data. And so, how it's organized, how accessible it is, how much it is leveraged by everyone in the organization, right? There's a cultural aspect to it. Is it ready for AI? Those types of things. And then second, honestly, it is working with with those third parties. So I mentioned that notion of we never want to ask somebody for information that we already have about them. That's ridiculous. That's akin to, having a relationship with someone and not, and then what was your name again? So your spouse who you've been with for 20 years, like it's ridiculous, right? But that's what we do as financial institutions a lot of times. And then the second thing is, like I said, it's finding other sources to take maybe what little information someone gives us, and then buying the rest of the information that we need. So we don't make it their problem. And that's some of those features, like finding places who will give us, all of the contact information based off of a user's cell phone number, that type of thing, and pre-filling that, or working with an organization like Plaid, who's already has a lot of that data. So that partnership is key, because that will enable really the best experience for someone who's already had to enter that information over and over and over again. So I think it's adopting that philosophy that gives us the ability to have kind of a more personalized experience ultimately.
It's interesting because we talk about it, we say it in cliche form almost, that the experiences in financial institutions are being shaped more and more by those outside of the banking world. That we're comparing what we get from Uber, what we get from Amazon, what we get from Google, what we're getting from AI, and saying, geez, why can't you do that? And it's interesting because, as you said, I want to make it so we have to ask the fewest number of questions. And I get back to, I think it's 7 years ago now, with the Apple Card, and you applied for an Apple credit card, and all of a sudden you realize you've only been asked 4 questions, and they're already approving you. They did all the risk. They did all the compilation of information that they already had on me to make it so that you're almost amazed by what they can do. But at the end of the day, and you've referenced it already, that only works if you provide value in return for that. Otherwise, it gets creepy. So how do you deal with that? Because members come in all ages, all experiences. How do you deal with the balancing of what you know about them or can know about them and what you're going to give in return to make it so that experience is equal and there's actually a value transfer as opposed to just getting too much information on them?
Yeah, I don't know that we can serve well the customer who, or member, or individual who is overly concerned with some of those privacy things. It's probably best to just not be involved in the banking system at all if you don't want your transaction data and all those types of things to be known by anyone.
Right.
And I have friends who want to be cash only. That's fine. I think the philosophy there is, again, even when we choose to pre-fill something, we tell someone that, this is an option that we're providing them, right? We may be able to pre-fill your information, you provide us with your phone number, and then we're giving it back to them to say, okay, can you confirm that this information is reacting? But I think, to your point, in the financial services space, which kind of lags, I think, the adoption of these kinds of technologies to the other more consumer-oriented spaces that people are used to interacting with. We are in a good position because we're able to see the trends and the things that are happening that people have already been kind of warmed up to interacting with apps and companies in those ways. And I think that plays to our advantage.
Well, this is refreshing because I sometimes think that we as financial services executives get more concerned about stepping over that barrier than the customer does. Again, if you provide them a value, and that may be simply knowing them the next time they call up or walk into a branch, that may simply be providing them solutions based on their transactions that really will work for them, even though we may be sometimes partially off. We need to embrace that characterization. I call it the difference between risk avoidance and risk management, where you just don't say, I'm not going to do anything that might get me in trouble, as opposed to, I'm going to balance it so that, yeah, I may get a branch that calls me and gets all upset because a customer got upset with them, but I'm going to have that right answer for them as to why that happened and why we did it. How do you balance the human element of the member interchange and relationship with the growing reliance on digital? In other words, how do you make a personal experience with Grow Financial, or how do you make the digital experience with Grow Financial be as good as what that personal experience is when they walk into a branch?
Good question. I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but I think it's a false assumption that a lot of us are guilty of, that you know that delivering digitally is inherently not human, right? I don't agree with that. So creating an experience that is simple, very intuitive, very fast, shows people that you respect them and their time, right? And so that we understand what is being enabled by their relationship with us, right? That they have something else that they need to go do next, and we need to get out of the way. We're just here to enable it, to make it possible, make it happen. I think if we acknowledge that and we build systems and experiences that deliver things quickly and conveniently, I think that is inherently human. Maybe more so than making somebody get in their car, sit in traffic, wait in line at a branch, make an appointment, and do those kinds of things. I think you could argue that that's no longer inherently human, right? Because it doesn't ultimately meet the needs of the people that we're trying to serve.
It's interesting. The most common and easy things to look at, you say, do we really need a human in every interchange? I don't complain when I drive through a toll booth on the freeway and don't stop at a toll booth person anymore and giving them change, or when I took it from being the human interchange to dropping it in a basket. I like going through with my little tag on it and knowing that, they know exactly where I am all the time, but I don't mind that at all, at the end of the day, because it saves me time and I get in the quick lane. Can you share an example of where innovation or technologies have directly improved the member journey at Grow?
Sure. I don't want to represent kind of that we have it all figured out, because we definitely don't.
It's
Our
a
work is
journey.
really just beginning.
If you think it's all figured out tomorrow, I'll guarantee I'll send you something that says, here you go,
It'll change.
new target.
100%.
Yeah.
But just this week, actually, 2 nights ago, we launched digital issuance for cards. And now that is part of an overall journey for us. A goal is sub 5 minute credit card experience from application to having the card in your wallet to be able to start charging and using. So that's kind of the broader goal. One component of that is digital issuance. So this component, really important. And I literally spoke with a member yesterday. This just kind of was all worked out really well. Spoke with a member yesterday who experienced fraud. And so in that process, of course, the card was turned off. And normally he would have to wait maybe 3 to 5 days, maybe 1 to 2 if we were to expedite something, or maybe drive across town to some place where you could have a card printed for you, instant issue, that type of thing. Instead, we issued a new card digitally. He went straight into the app, added it to his digital wallet, boom, back in business, right? So that makes someone's life better, right? And you can do that while you're sitting at a restaurant if you have to, right? So it's a very easy process. It's very fast, very quick, gives people access to their money, and so pumped that we were able to do that earlier this week. And I'm of course even more excited about how it's going to fit in that overall kind of sub 5 minute experience that we're looking at.
It's interesting. You told so many stories in that little story. In that, number one, the digital account issuance is not the end goal. That's not your North Star. It's the entire prospect of what you're going to be able to do with a customer from a speed, scale, and secure fashion. Number two, because I had that type of experience happen to me, I think it's 5 years ago now, where I realized I had fraud in the account. they shut it down. I'm saying, oh gosh, it's you don't even want to call in because you realize there's so many things tied to that card, automatic withdrawals and all this. You're going like, it's not going to be there. Oh, and by the way, how do I get out of this parking garage that I used my card on and I need it? Can you not turn it off for 5 minutes so I can get out of this garage? They go, no, it's already in your Apple Wallet. You can already connect it and you can use it. And you realize that in that moment, not only did it establish loyalty, but it established trust, and you got the feeling that your organization was ahead of the curve and looking out for me. And in a perfect world, the customer could not write that scenario better. And that means so much. And what we're looking at from a customer experience and engagement standpoint is there was an engagement that they didn't want to have, that you made it a winning experience. And they actually will tell multiple people about how you took something that was very frightening to them, very frustrating to them. And in the back of their mind, they're thinking, because of what you did on the back end, they feel that the whole front end, oh, am I going to lose money? That's kind of taken care of also. All these things come together to make it so that the loyalty and your position in the marketplace improves. You talked about your leadership committee and getting together and looking at innovation and looking at growth and looking at risk and looking at experiences. How do you make this a cultural phenomenon across Grow? How do you ensure that employees are actually signed into this member-first strategy that may include digital and may in the back of their minds put them on warning or in their minds on warning that they may be at risk as humans in an AI-driven world? How do you build that culture in a way that they're on board?
A couple things come to mind. Of course, that's hard work, but it's critical on a number of levels. I think certainly, culture is contagious. So I think we all know that, that a good culture from a team member standpoint bleeds through ultimately to the member experience. But I think one of the most critical components is that we have to work as one group as an organization to serve our members. We have to know we're one group. And I mentioned some of that, how that's played out in the past. But one of the things that it's really a third rail at our organization. We don't really allow anyone in any role to get away with the whole, I don't speak with members piece, right? So everyone is a frontline team member from that perspective. Everyone should be able to be prepared to have those interactions with our team members. So that's a big piece, is making sure that we understand that we are all a part of this and that we're all here for that member. I think the other piece that really strengthens the culture, and this has really been something from in the last 5 years, but that really does center around our purpose. So we have been very intentional about refocusing in the last 5 years on that purpose. So we are a not-for-profit financial institution, and we exist for a purpose to improve the financial well-being, the lives of our members and our community, our neighbors, those types of things. Our line on that, our tagline on that is we serve people, not profit. And so everyone in every role needs to be able to connect how what they are doing is proof that we are serving people, that we are making a difference in someone's life. So we're really big fans of that. And that plays out in a number of ways, but an executive may ask a frontline team member to say, hey, how are we doing on this metric or that? And the expectation is that everyone understands kind of what's happening more broadly in the organization, not just in their one piece, so that they can make those connections.
Gets back to knowing your North Star. And I've used that term more in the last 6 months than I ever have, but I think that helps guide what you're doing next. It helps guide the employee's security with their job. It also obviously helps the member. You talk about the metrics. How do you measure success from a standpoint of customer experiences beyond traditional metrics such as, let's say, net promoter score or satisfaction scores? How do you as an individual, but also you as an organization, measure whether or not you're bringing value to the organization?
Yeah, great question. Honestly, I'm open to feedback on this one. We're an MPS shop, and I'm new in my journey as the chief experience officer here. I know others prefer other scores. I know we are searching for other metrics, particularly as they relate to purpose, right? How do we see in our data that we're making a difference in someone's life, right? So there's those kinds of metrics that we're searching for. Um, but it's really only in the last year that we've actually dedicated a full-time individual to just reading and responding to our MPS surveys on a consistent basis. So that's kind of where we're at in our journey. We were getting it and we were measuring. We weren't necessarily doing anything about it before. Now we are. And so that person is dedicated to those things. Whatever the metrics are, whatever, whether that number's going down or up, really it's the feedback that we're getting from members from those interactions that are helping us to form our roadmap. So our members, regardless of the kind of survey, they tell us what they want. They tell us what they love. They tell us what bothers them. They even tell us about the features that they want that we actually already have, which tells us that maybe we're not making things visible, or we're not making it easy to use, those types of things. So it really is about listening. But I'm an open book, or I'm open to maybe some of the other superior metrics that would tell us whether we're doing a good job or not. I feel really good right now knowing that we are listening and seeing a direct connection to our roadmap as an organization. And I think that's probably one of the best metrics.
It's interesting because you took it into a different direction. I liked it better because you assigned a person not simply to look at the numbers, not simply looking at a report, but to say, what are we going to do about it? What's our next step from each one of these things? And I think I use Salesforce as an example, that almost every financial institution owns Salesforce to some degree. Very few can tell me what they're doing with it and what the impact's been. You've just stated that, we're an MPS shop, but that doesn't mean we're simply getting the reports going, good, we did good. We did. No, you're doing something about it. The deployment is where your emphasis is on, not the metric itself. And I think that's a key differentiator that I'm seeing at successful organizations is who's going to deploy against it. Who's going to actually do something because of it, as opposed to simply going, we can brag about the fact that we've improved our NPS score by X, Y, or Z. And then even discussing it with your own members to let them know they're part of an organization that's making a difference, that they've done this, that, and the other thing. So, you've been throughout the whole organization at Grow. You obviously live and breathe the part. It's very clear. It's great when I'm having the opportunity on FIsionaries podcast to interview somebody that you go, oh, this person's just oozing what they do for a living, and they're loving every second of it. And certainly it's more challenging than ever, and you have greatly expanded your role at Grow. But what's next on your agenda? Without giving away any secrets, what right now is your biggest mission over the next year or so?
Yeah, good question.
What's your North Star? How's that?
I don't know if my North Star is a part of something that is a talent that I have, or if it is a deficiency that I have. Maybe it's a little bit of both. I do kind of view everything as a bit of an existential threat. I want to go further, faster. I definitely have the tendency to forget about all of the great things. I mean, we've just in the last 12 months embarked on the most ambitious digital roadmap of enhancements and feature additions and things like that ever. And it would take me a lot of time to remember what those things were, because I'm really only thinking about what's next. Which isn't, I know that's not healthy, but So I think that's for me. I'm still spending a lot of time talking with our
I
partners.
think it's healthy because you're looking forward as opposed to looking back.
Yeah, yeah, we're certainly not resting on our laurels. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean it's a big deal. And what's interesting is people want to coagulate around the people that have that vision. You know, if you have everyone around you, and if your leadership is that way, obviously it starts at the top, and it is very clear how quickly I can determine whether or not this institution is really walking the walk more than just talking the talk, because you can see it in the eyes of the people that are involved and where they're looking, what they're trying to do, and simply the fact that you're one of the first organizations to embrace the mantle partnership at Alchemy is a big deal. I'll keep it all clean because the reality is it means that you're looking for that next best thing out there and going to implement it against it. And what's good is when you find a partner that is going to help you get you there aggressively, it feels good if that's what you want to be. You know, again, as I said, if as long as you're not putting, you already discussed the fact that you're not putting any roadblocks in their way to implement the way it should be implemented. That puts you in a very, very elite class of organization because there aren't many. There's many that are looking toward it. There's very few that are accomplishing it because we tend as organizations to get in our own way.
we do, and we also tend to, put everything on those partner relationships, right? So I've recognized as we've kind of started to reinvent really our relationship with Alchemy, honestly, in the last 12 months, that if we're going to say, hey, bring us more stuff, we want to go faster, we have to be prepared to rise to that as well. And so I don't want them to go, okay, we can do this stuff. And we're going, oh, no, we can't do that. It's too risky, or it's going to be too much money, or it's going to be, any of those types of things. So it is definitely, really a two-way partnership.
Well, and this podcast itself is proof of that. The Alchemy team doesn't bring people to the show that aren't engaged in what's going on, and that's a benefit I get. I get to interview the best of the best, and your organization, you yourself, are one of those, and that's encouraging for organizations to see it can be done, and it's an important aspect of what we're doing right now because you have no abundance of time that you can fill in. You're busy every moment, and it's a matter of just balancing that. And as you've talked throughout the podcast, it's a matter of finding the partners that can get you there because the capabilities are there. It's just a matter of how you're going to get there and if you're going to deploy them the way they should be. Because you've been in this role or in the organization for 8 years, I think it is. The reality is the amount of time it takes to deploy a new idea now has gotten down to months instead of years. So we no longer have to look at an annual plan going, by the end of 2026, we want to have a new account opening experience that's X. No. By the end of October, I want to have this thing deployed and tested. And that is a new world, but it's one that's only made possible through the partnerships across the whole ecosystem that are out there today. And you're more the orchestrator. You got to make all those instruments work together to make it a good music. So, Jared, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. Great to meet you virtually, and we will get together.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the FIsionaries podcast. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into all the tips and tricks you can use to help elevate your digital game. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please share it with others both inside and outside your organization. Post about it on social media and leave a thumbs up and a comment on the post. This has been a production of Evergreen Podcasts. A special thank you to our senior producer, Leah Hassage, and our audio and video engineer, Chris Fafalius.